Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please gift the like button a brand new puzzle, but don't tell them you've secretly removed 2 of the pieces. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. Just before midnight on August 20th, 2012, a 19-year-old college student named Rose Marr and her best friend, 19-year-old Elizabeth Nass, walked down Main Street in their hometown of Ellicott City, Maryland. It was their last night together before they each would head back to college in separate states. And so to cap off what had felt like a perfect summer, they decided to grab a few beers, despite being underage, and head on over to their favorite hangout spot, a train trestle that ran over Main Street. A train trestle is literally a bridge, but for trains. Now, to be clear, this train trestle was not like some secret daredevil hideout spot. Lots of people knew about it. Lots of kids in town, including Rose and Elizabeth, had been up here many, many times. And while there was an active train track that ran across it, the ledge on the trestle where everybody would sit when they were up there was several feet away from the tracks, kind of safely out of the way. You could be up there looking down over the town, and a train could literally pass right by you and not affect you. So overall, it was safe. So Elizabeth and Rose climbed up onto the train trestle and took their seats along the ledge, safely away from the tracks. And then they cracked open a few beers and began talking about their upcoming semesters. They talked about which classes they were going to take and what they were looking forward to and really how much they were going to miss each other. And then at some point, Rose pulled out her phone and she took a photo of her and Elizabeth's feet dangling off the trestle. Basically, the photo captured their feet kind of hovering over Main Street. Then she posted that photo to Twitter. And then as soon as she hit post, she and Elizabeth heard this loud screeching sound coming from right behind them. And when they turned around to see what it was, something huge smashed into them, and then it went black. That loud screeching sound was the sound of a train passing by right behind them. But remember, the tracks are set far enough back that, the train, it couldn't hit them. And in this case, the train was not the thing that hit these 2 girls. Instead, it was something truly unfortunate that happened to them. When that train passed by the girls, it partially derailed. Not a full scale, like cars going everywhere off the tracks, but instead, several of these cars basically toppled over to their sides. And some of those cars that toppled over were carrying thousands of pounds of coal. And these were open cars. You can literally see the coal as the train goes by. And so as the train's going by, those cars topple, all this coal comes out, and the coal smashed into Rose and Elizabeth and fully buried them. It was like they were under an avalanche, but not of snow, of coal. And so by the time the girls were pulled out of the coal, they were already dead. Rose and Elizabeth were the only 2 fatalities from this derailment. Their families would later sue the railroad company alleging negligence, and each family would receive a settlement, though the exact amounts were never disclosed. Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so in honor of that, I wanted to share a quick story about my own mental health. So back in 2017, I got out of the military after several years, and I really went through a sort of identity crisis. So much of who I was wrapped up in being a Navy SEAL, but now that I was out on the other side, it was like I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't even know what job to get or really what to do with my life. And it was sort of like this existential crisis that really sent me into a very dark and depressing spiral. But instead of seeking help or telling anybody about it, I began sort of lashing out at family and friends and just kind of being a downer everywhere I went. It wasn't until my family and friends, because they loved me, stepped in and said, "You really need to see someone," that I finally understood the impact I was having on other people and how bad things had gotten for me. And so I did go out and I spoke to a therapist. And at first, I admit I wasn't sold that this was going to be a big solution for me. But pretty quickly, having that neutral third party to kind of bounce ideas off of and gain perspective from really changed my life. And it set me on a course to where I'm happy today. I still see a therapist, but it's therapy that got me to this place right now, this equilibrium I have reached. It's because of therapy. So if you're struggling right now, I would highly suggest thinking about therapy as an option. And a great starting point for therapy is BetterHelp, primarily because it's entirely online. So it's very easy, it's accessible. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey online, and then within 2 days, they'll pair you up with a licensed therapist. And if for any reason you want to change your therapist, you can do that at any time at no additional cost. Click the link in the description below or go to betterhelp.com/Mrballen to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Again, that's betterhelp.com/Mrballen to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Okay, back to the stories. At 6 p.m. on October 27th, 2014, A 17-year-old boy named Jesus Meneses was playing basketball with a group of friends on an outdoor basketball court at Kinloch Park in Miami, Florida. The friends had broken up into two teams and were in the middle of a very intense pickup game. And the game was pretty close, and Jesus' team was doing pretty well. But at some point, when Jesus and his team had possession, one of his teammates just got frazzled by the defense and just took this crazy three-point shot from way behind the line, and the ball just sailed right past the hoop, completely missed it, air ball, and it bounced and then went clean over this chain link fence on the edge of the park. And as soon as this happened, Jesus and all of his friends let out a collective groan, because they knew basically anything that went over that fence was pretty much gone forever. But to Jesus' surprise, one of his friends turned to Jesus and was like, "Hey, why don't you just hop the fence and go get the ball?" Now, Jesus really did not want to do that. I mean, he had been coming to this park since he was like 1 year old with his family, and his mom and dad had always told him to never, ever climb that fence. Never. But now, Jesus' friend who had asked him to do this had kind of like turned it into a dare, and he's like, "No, really, come on, Jesus, like, go hop the fence and get the ball." And the other friends had kind of picked up on this, and they were kind of egging it on, being like, "Yeah, Jesus, go over there, get the ball." And so Jesus knew, like, this is not a good idea. I cannot go over that fence. But here I am, surrounded by all my peers, basically egging me on to go do it. And he didn't want to look weak or scared. And so he's thinking to himself, hey, what's the worst that could happen? And he's like, all right, I'll go get it. And so Jesus left the basketball court and walked over to this fence. And it was about 7 feet tall, and there was all this barbed wire across the top of it. And so as he's standing there looking at the fence, he turns back around, and his friends are all smiling, like, yeah, go get it. And so he's like, okay. And he begins climbing the fence. And he gets to the top and he reaches the barbed wire and he very carefully positions himself so he doesn't cut himself on the way over. And right after he's cleared the barbed wire, he kind of tumbles to the other side of the fence. He hits the ground and he's kind of shaken up from hitting the ground pretty hard. But, he stands up, dusts himself off. He realizes he's okay, and he turns and looks through the fence now at his friends, and they're all cheering him on. And so now Jesus is feeling really confident, and he kind of smiles at his friends like he's the hero now. And he turns, and sure enough, there's the basketball just a few feet away. So he walks over, picks up the basketball, and chucks it over the fence back to his friends. And Jesus was about to climb over the fence and go rejoin his friends when he happened to look back in the direction of where his basketball had been, and he noticed there was another basketball that somebody else had lost over this fence. Except this basketball was on the other side of a second fence. Basically, once you climb this first fence, a couple of feet later, there is a second fence. These were the two fences that Jesus and everybody who ever came to this park were warned about. Never climb them. But Jesus has already climbed the first one, and he's got his basketball, and he's thinking, I can climb the second one too, and I can get that basketball, and then we'll have two. So if we ever lose another one, we have a backup. So without even telling his friends, Jesus walks over to the second fence, which is basically identical to the first fence, about 7 feet tall, a bunch of barbed wire at the top, and he carefully climbs to the top, and he kind of positions himself over the barbed wire, and then he drops down to the other side. Except this time, when he hits the ground after clearing that second fence, something horrible happens. Within seconds of Jesus landing inside of that second fenced-in area, his friends back on the court saw what was going on and began totally panicking. They're screaming, they're running around, they don't know what to do. Eventually, one of them would call 911, and then minutes later, first responders show up and they find Jesus' friends. They're totally frantic. They're all pointing toward the fenced-in areas. And the first responders, they look and they know right away there's virtually nothing they can do to save Jesus. The reason these fences were totally off limits, the reason Jesus' family specifically warned him from when he was a young kid to never ever climb them, was because inside of the second fenced-in area was an electrical power grid. And there were signs all over these two fences warning people to stay back, that it was dangerous, no trespassing, like fatalities will occur if you go in here. But Jesus ignored the warnings. And he climbed the first fence, and he climbed the second fence. Except when he landed inside of that second fenced-in area, he landed on a live electrical wire. And the second he did, 500,000 volts of electricity coursed through his body. For reference, the average lightning bolt contains about 300,000 volts of electricity. So as soon as Jesus hit that wire, it was like the equivalent of 2 lightning bolts striking him at once, but not just one time, over and over and over again. And so unfortunately, Jesus died almost immediately. On the afternoon of April 22nd, 2023, a 49-year-old father of 3 named Carl O'Keefe crawled through a cave system in Cumbria, England. He was on his hands and knees, shuffling his way forward, and the only light that guided him through this tight, small tunnel was the headlamp on his head. So Carl was an adventurer. He loved things like rock climbing and exploring caves. But this particular cave, he wasn't that familiar with. He'd only been here a couple other times, and he didn't have a map, so really he didn't actually know where he was going. But Carl wasn't remotely worried, because he knew this was easily the safest cave system he had ever explored. In fact, this place was so safe that often people showed up with their kids and let them run around freely with no fear they were going to get hurt. And so Carl has no worries here. And also he's thinking to himself, he's not very far into this particular tunnel. He can actually still hear the other people and their kids kind of right behind him. And so again, even though he doesn't really know where he is, he feels completely fine. And so Carl continued crawling through this tunnel, and eventually he reached this T intersection where he just had to choose between going right and left. And again, he's got no map. He doesn't really know where he's going. So he decides, okay, I'll just go right. And so he begins going down this tunnel, which closely resembled the tunnel he had just came from. But as he was crawling along, he started to feel like the walls around him were kind of shrinking, and it was getting harder and harder to push his body through this tunnel. And then finally, when it felt like it was so tight around him and it was getting so claustrophobic that maybe he should just turn around, he reached a dead end. That's all this was. The right turn was just a dead end. And so he thought, okay, I'll just turn around and go back the way I came and, maybe explore the left side. So in order to do that, Carl decided he would make a U-turn with his body. He would literally just turn around and go back the way he came, leading with his head and his upper body. And so he's facing the dead end. He's on his hands and knees, and he begins doing this U-turn. And he kind of turns and gets his head and his shoulders and his upper half kind of folded around until they're looking back in the direction he was coming. But he was too physically big to get his lower half to complete the U-turn. And so he was effectively wedged in this U-shaped position. He couldn't do anything. He was just stuck. But Carl didn't panic because he knows this is a safe place. This is not a big deal. Nobody gets hurt in these cave systems. And I just need to rethink how I go back the way I came. Clearly, this U-turn attempt is not working. And so he decides, okay, let's reset. I'll pull my shoulders and my upper body back, and I'll reset facing the dead end. I'll basically go back to exactly the position I was just in. Except when he tried pulling his upper body and his head and his shoulders back to where he was facing the dead end, he realized he was also stuck going in that direction. He couldn't go back to the way he was, and he couldn't return in the direction he had come. He was stuck in this U-shape and couldn't go anywhere. Now, again, Carl is telling himself that it's going to be okay. This is a safe place. Kids play here. Like, this is no big deal. I'm going to be okay. And so he tried, to kind of shimmy himself one way or the other, but it was like no matter what he did, he just could not move out of this U-shape. And as that happened, he began to kind of panic. His heart rate began to rise. It became harder to breathe. It felt like the walls of this cave were kind of pushing down on him. And before long, he was becoming overwhelmingly claustrophobic. It just felt like the walls of this tunnel were crushing him, and he really began to panic. And he just started screaming out for help. Immediately, some of the staff who heard Carl yelling out made their way into this tunnel system and actually saw Carl. They could see him in this U-shape, totally wedged. And at first, they couldn't understand what was even happening here. But when they tried to pull him out, they couldn't get him to move. I mean, he really was totally stuck here. And so sensing that this was a true emergency, the staff backed out and they called the fire department. And the fire department, they came out and they too could not get Carl out. He was stuck. And so pretty quickly, Carl realized all he could do here was just do his best to stay calm because this position he was in was really restricting his breathing, not to mention, the tunnel itself is pressing down on him. And so he just tried to stay calm and kind of have measured breaths. And he kept thinking, the rescue team, they're right there. They're going to get me out of here quickly. I know it. But much to Carl's shock and to the shock of all the first responders, they didn't get Carl out quickly. Instead, it would take an agonizing 4 hours to finally free him. And during those 4 hours, Carl got weaker and weaker and weaker and more panicked. The instant Carl was out of the tunnel, he was rushed to the nearest hospital and admitted to the intensive care unit. And there, they would discover he had suffered all these extensive crush injuries from being in that position for so long. He had severe bone damage, organ damage, and nerve damage. I mean, he was in horrible shape. And despite heroic efforts by medical staff to try to save Carl, ultimately, he would die 8 days later from those injuries. And his death would become massive news because it really seemed impossible that somebody could die in that cave system because it was meant to be so safe. This cave system was not like an underground cave system where spelunkers go. No, this was a cave system for kids. It was a kid's play place. All the tunnels in the cave itself was made out of plastic, again, so kids could crawl and explore. But adults were told they too could go through those tunnels with their kids. And so Carl had gone to a birthday party for one of his kids' friends. He had brought his kids along, and being the devoted father that he was, he went right in there with his kids and was crawling all around and goofing around with the kids. until unfortunately he got stuck.